Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, July the 21st, 2021. I remember around the time of the economic collapse, 2007, 2008, it struck me that rich people, very rich people, super rich people, celebrities, it would behoove them to be more shy and retiring and not to make such a spectacle of themselves, lest they become the subject of murderous envy. That did not happen. That was one of my worst predictions. In fact, it has gone in the other direction. There is no getting away from these people and their conspicuous consumption. Here's a story, Jennifer Smith from the Daily Mail. Jeff Bezos said Wednesday he is not competing with SpaceX's Elon Musk and Virgin Galactic's Richard Branson with his spaceflight, and instead said they are all contributing to a future space industry that would eventually have thousands of companies. The three billionaires all have varying goals when it comes to their individual space missions. Richard Branson wants to establish commercial space tourism with his Virgin flights, while Bezos says he wants to move all of the harmful, polluting industries on Earth to space to allow them to continue while preserving Earth's environment. Musk wants to put broadband satellites in space and also colonize Mars. Meanwhile, of course, Bill Gates was involved in a pilot project to block out the light of the sun. I wonder if these people, Bezos and Musk and Branson and Gates, understand just how fiendish they seem. Bond super villains. Bezos, in an interview with CBS this morning that aired Wednesday, insisted this wasn't the case. I promise you it really isn't a competition. If you want to think about it, there's one first person in space. His name is Yuri Gagarin, and it happened 60 years ago. What we have to do is build a whole industry, Gail. It's got to be an ecosystem made up of dozens, hundreds of companies. Just like what you see with the internet today, two kids in a dorm room could start a space company that changes the world. They compete against each other, but there are going to be many winners, he told Gail King. Branson congratulated Bezos' Blue Origin team on Twitter Tuesday after their mission, saying, "Well done, Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos, Mark, Wally, and Oliver. Impressive. Very best to all the crew from me and all the team at Virgin Galactic." I wonder if Musk understands. I mean, he must understand that anyone who goes to Mars, assuming that they can get there alive, is never going to return. Does he fully understand that? Does the mother of his child, I believe she goes by the name Grimes, if I got that right, does she understand? She seems to be very keen to go to Mars. If she does, she would die there, probably sooner rather than later. But there are people who are very angry with Bezos, and these are people on the left, but I have to admit they have a point. This is from Joshua Rhett Miller at the New York Post. Lefty Democrats are lambasting Blue Origin founder Jeff Bezos over his despicable comments thanking Amazon employees and customers for financing his brief trip to space and calling on the billionaire to pay his share of taxes here on Earth. The show of appreciation by Bezos Tuesday to the workers and customers who paid for all this, following his $5.5 billion flight, did not dazzle the likes of Senator Bernie Sanders, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Senator Elizabeth Warren. Am I supposed to be impressed that a billionaire went to space while he's paid zero in federal income taxes some years, and the workers at his company struggle to afford their medical bills, rent, and food for their kids? Sanders tweeted, "Nope, it's time to invest in working people here on Earth." Given how well known it is how badly Amazon treats its employees. Basically, they are worked until they break, sometimes literally, and they have to quit. Ocasio-Cortez, meanwhile, said Amazon customers paid for Bezos' trip while alleging the online giant abused its market power to decimate small businesses. I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a pedant here. Decimate means to reduce by 1/10. The clue is in the deci part, but I suppose I'm fighting a losing battle here. Yes, Amazon workers did pay for this with lower wages, union busting, a frenzied and inhuman workplace, and delivery drivers not having health insurance during a pandemic, AOC tweeted. Bezos awarded $100 million each to political commentator Van Jones and chef Jose Andres during a press conference following his trip, telling the pair to donate it to charities and nonprofits. CBS This Morning anchor Gayle King, of course, Gayle King is the bestest buddy of billionaire Oprah Winfrey, applauded. Yes, and these people somehow end up on television lecturing the little people. Gayle King applauded the jaw-dropping gifts to Jones and Andres on air Wednesday, saying that Bezos is singling out people who he thinks are doing hard work and doing it with civility. But the donation didn't apparently win over Representative Earl Blumenauer, an Oregon Democrat on the Tax Writing Ways and Means Committee, who proposed legislation Tuesday to tax space travel for non-scientific research purposes. Space travel isn't a tax-free holiday for the wealthy, Blumenauer tweeted. We pay taxes on plane tickets. Billionaires flying into space, producing no scientific value, should do the same and then some. King, however, defended Bezos. Golly, there's a shocker. Noting that he should be able to spend his billions how he pleases. There's been a lot of talk about all the money that was spent. I love people trying to tell him how to spend his own money, she said sarcastically. Meanwhile, some Amazon customers also criticized Bezos' nod to them for paying for his trip, saying he's officially lost their business. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Palcasso88 and Dan and Bob Paxson, Don from Beyond, Jogakin 666, Gamion. Bob Paxson says, thank God for our current philanthropist class. You know, I'm reminded that, of course, Andrew Carnegie, whose life was certainly conflicted, between good and evil, but he spent a large part of his fortune building libraries all over the English-speaking world so that poor people could have books to read. I'm reminded of the Mellon family, who scoured the world for great works of art and then paid for a building, the National Gallery in Washington, to house one of the finest collections of art in the world. That was the old philanthropist Robert Barron. Yes, but Jeff Bezos would prefer to spend a few minutes in space and to give huckster Van Jones $100 million. Just think about that for a moment. That Jeff Bezos giving Van Jones $100 million is like you finding coins in your suit jacket. That's how little it is to him. When Mark Zuckerberg donated $100 million a few years ago to the New Jersey school system, I joked that it probably would have been better if he just simply burned the money, because then you would be able to, get some heat from that. At the time, I thought Zuckerberg is going about this the wrong way. This money in New York is all going to be wasted or stolen. Why doesn't he simply buy journalists? Well, maybe he was listening to me or, overhearing what I was typing on the computer, because that's what Zuckerberg has decided to do now, buy journalists. And they're not saying, Facebook is not saying who they are giving these billions of dollars to. So when you read someone now, some journalist, some newspaper, how do you know whether this is a Zuckerberg suborned or not? Well, I guess you don't. Palcasso88 says, Bezos' rocket reminds me of the rocket from Flash Gordon. Gamian says, I wouldn't return from Mars. Yes, Chogokin 666, don't go to Uranus. That was one of my favorite jokes on Futurama, where Fry mentioned that planet, and the professor said, no. We stopped calling it, all because of all the jokes, we stopped calling it that hundreds of years ago. And Fry said, well, what's it called now? And the professor said, Eurectum. I know it's a cheap joke, but I can't stop laughing. Are Oprah and Gail more than friends, says Palcasso88. Well, that's the rumor. That's the rumor. I want to go to the Oort cloud, a tax haven, says David Wright. Metal Mike says, no one is going to Mars. I won't even get into 1960s technology taking people to the moon. Steve says, since when does the modern left care about working people and small businesses? They care about pronouns and pretending to love Black people. Well, they don't care, but it's useful for them to pretend, because a lot of Republicans don't even bother to pretend that they like the working class. He is my rep and doesn't live here, says our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Thank you for your service. Star Rover says NASA engineers use slide rules to get astronauts to the moon. Well, look, people were smarter back then. It's that simple. What has NASA done since then? I mean, they're pretty good at blowing things up. They just made this disastrous decision to promote diversity before everything else. So what, America could be traumatized by a school teacher being blown to pieces in front of their eyes on television screens at the beginning of the day? Okay. Oh, yes, Kevin Steele. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that. I don't know. Sometimes it's just hard to say. You know, people just don't like each other anymore. Chogokin 666 says conservatives will boycott Ben and Jerry's for boycotting Israel, but states with anti-BDS will be counter-boycotting and suing themselves. Viva Cuba Libre. I just don't. I know there's a lot of Cubans in Florida that influence the vote, but America's economic embargo against Cuba, I mean, why don't just admit that, we tried to get rid of Castro dozens of times and failed? Why not just admit that? Texas Feral Hog says, what about baseball boycotting Georgia? Star Rover says Carnegie libraries were designed to be very functional, are still in use in many cities. Yes, the one in Vancouver has been repurposed, and the one in Victoria, which is downtown, has been repurposed as well. Edmonton had a handsome Carnegie library, and it was torn down, in the 1980s, I believe, and a hideous, brutalist tower was installed in its place. Steve says, I remember the Zuckerberg Newark school story. Most of the 100 million went to consultants. But of course, consultants are the best people on earth. Okay, Oscar Toe, hello. NASA puts up remote-controlled cars on planets for the hell of it now. Unmanned spaceflight has had many successes, says Texas Viral Hog. Wait, did Bezos reach 100 kilometers, 100,000 feet? I don't know, because otherwise it doesn't count. If you read Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, I mean, it's really clear that they took a wrong step in the 1960s because, of course, they had astronauts or test pilots in planes, which take off and land, and you don't have to use a, Saturn V rocket. They had already reached space, and they decided, we're just going to call this off. And I guess now they're back to that idea, but, in effect, 60 years were wasted. Chad Chadson says, in grade school, my teacher seemed in a TV just long enough for us to watch the Discovery blow up, then slowly wheeled it out. Yes, Nicholas von Hoffman wrote a great story about that Eisenhower decided at the beginning of the American space program that it's going to be military men because these are experimental vehicles. And the expectation was that people were going to die. But if they're in the military, well, they've taken that risk. Having civilians die is not a good thing for PR. And that's a lesson that, I don't know, NASA doesn't seem to have learned. Let's look at, Australia, which, of course, as I've mentioned, is in a contest with my own country of Canada, which is the most effeminate country in the Anglosphere. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Australian MP Frank Pangallo says that what unvaccinated people are allowed to do in the community, quote, will need to be controlled and restricted, unquote, by authorities. The SA Best Party legislator, they actually named their party the Best Party, called on the Australian government, which has indicated it won't make vaccine passports compulsory, to make them mandatory for access to hospitality venues, public places, workplaces, and for travel. Pangallo asserts that vaccine passports, will be crucial to avoid the country suffering a health and economic catastrophe. While people might still have a choice whether or not to get vaccinated, what they can do in the community will need to be controlled and restricted. In other words, those who refuse to take the vaccine should become second-class citizens, be discriminated against, and remain under de facto lockdown indefinitely. Citing the threat of new variants, and we're down to Lambda now. I think we're past Gamma, and we've reached Lambda. Pangallo said, I understand people will think this is a rather drastic and draconian step, but this pandemic continues to evolve in ways and waves nobody can predict. Yeah, just like any other virus. Despite only 13% of the Australian population having been vaccinated so far, Pangallo said vaxports were a necessity in order to prevent the entire country going into lockdown. Watson comments, Australia is pursuing a drastically stupid zero COVID policy, which has led to entire towns and cities being locked down after the discovery of just a single infection. As we highlighted yesterday, public health officials are now telling citizens that they shouldn't even engage in conversations with each other, even if wearing masks, in the name of stopping the spread of the virus. Authorities have also seen the most brutal enforcement of lockdown out of any developed country. A pregnant woman was arrested in her own home for planning an anti-lockdown protest on Facebook, while the state also gave itself the power to seize children from their parents and enter homes without a warrant under COVID-19 rules. So what is happening with Saint Anthony Fauci? This is from Deborah Heine at American Greatness. During a contentious back and forth with Senator Rand Paul, Dr. Fauci on Tuesday doubled down on his claim that the National Institutes of Health did not fund risky gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and angrily accused Paul of lying about the issue. You do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly, the testy NIAID director snapped at Paul. Fauci reacted angrily to the Kentucky senator's pointed questions during a Senate committee hearing meant to update lawmakers on the country's COVID-19 response. Paul began his line of questioning by asking Fauci if he wanted to retract his previous testimony denying U.S. government funding of gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan lab. Gain-of-function is highly controversial. Well, that's one way to put it. Insane would be another way. Highly controversial research that involves making pathogens and viruses more lethal and virulent in a laboratory. As you are aware, it is a crime to lie to Congress, Paul said, adding that under the criminal code, it's a federal crime with a 5-year penalty. On your last trip to Congress on May the 11th, You stated that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And yet gain-of-function research was done entirely at the Wuhan Institute by Dr. Shi Zhengli and was funded by the NIH. Senator Paul cited a paper by Dr. Shi, who is known as the Bat Lady, by the way, entitled, quote, "Discovery of a rich gene pool of bat SARS-related coronaviruses provides new insights into the origins of SARS coronavirus," unquote, which describes efforts to create a coronavirus that is not found in nature and lists the NIH as a source of funding. Paul pointed out that the research described in the paper explicitly matches the definition of gain-of-function research. Paul went on to cite Richard Ebright, a professor of chemistry and chemical biology at Rutgers University, who said, "The Wuhan lab used NIH funding to construct novel chimeric SARS-related coronavirus with the ability to infect human cells in laboratory animals. This is high-risk research that creates new potential pandemic pathogens that exist only in the lab, not in nature." Still citing Ebright, Paul continued, "The research matches, indeed epitomizes the definition of gain-of-function research done in Wuhan, for which there was supposed to be a federal pause." Dr. Fauci, Senator Paul asked, "Knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your May 11th claim that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?" Fauci answered defiantly, "Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract this statement. The paper that you were referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being a gain of function." As Fauci continued to obfuscate, Paul interjected, "When you take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans, you're saying that's not gain of function research?" Fauci responded, "That is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about." Paul interrupted again to give Fauci the NIH's definition of gain of function research, which says, quote, "Scientific research that increases the transmissibility among animals is gain of function," unquote. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility in humans. How can you say that it is not gain of function? Paul demanded. "It is not," Fauci snapped. "It's a dance and you're dancing around this," Paul shot back. "You're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic." At this point, Fauci, the chief medical advisor to President Biden, appeared to become rattled by the senator's accusations. "If the point you were making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-grant from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2, that's where you are getting," Fauci sputtered. "We don't know," Paul interjected. "We don't know if it came from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it did come from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself." Fauci replied, "I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator." He argued that the viruses involved in the NIH-funded research could not result in the pathogen that caused the current pandemic. "No one's saying those viruses caused it," Paul interrupted. "What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab and NIH funded it. You can't get away from it. It meets your definition and you're obfuscating the truth." "I'm not obfuscating the truth. You are the one," Fauci bellowed. He again blustered that the NIH-funded research could not have caused the pandemic. Paul again told him he wasn't saying that. "You're implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that," Fauci exclaimed. It could have been, Paul responded. "If anyone is lying here, Senator, it's you," Fauci declared angrily, pointing his finger at Paul. We see here that Dr. Fauci, in addition to his many medical and bureaucratic qualifications, is a master of the "I know you are, but what am I?" defense. And of course, no account of the distress of St. Fauci would be complete without checking in on Don Lemon of CNN. This is from Ian Hanchett at Breitbart. On Tuesday's broadcast of CNN's Don Lemon Tonight, the host reacted to Senator Ron Paul's exchange with Dr. Fauci over federal funding of gain-of-function research by saying that, quote, "There's nothing to prove there, and the lying, the misinformation, it's why we can't bridge the political gap, even though our lives are at stake, and you still have people who are acting like Rand Paul." He continued, "The misinformation keeps spreading even or especially on Capitol Hill. That's where the Delta variant has been detected, prompting the Capitol doctor to urge members to get vaccinated and to consider masking up." That's one of the chief vaccine deniers, Senator Rand Paul. Well, he tried to make Dr. Fauci into his personal punching bag today as they went head-to-head over the senator's bogus claim that the NIH somehow played a role in funding research that led to the origins of the pandemic, and Dr. Fauci was definitely not having it. After playing the exchange, Lemon reacted, "What is wrong with Rand Paul? Seriously, I know that's what you at home are thinking, because I'm thinking the same thing. What's wrong with him? What is he trying to prove? There's nothing to prove there, and he keeps embarrassing himself. Rand Paul, stop it. You look like an idiot. The lying, the misinformation is why we can't bridge the political gap, even though our lives are at stake, and you still have people who are acting like Rand Paul." Yes, a word from Don Lemon. There's another story from Breitbart, this by Joel Pollack. White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield, who told reporters in 2020 that Hunter Biden laptop stories were Russian misinformation, accused conservative news outlets Tuesday of misinformation on vaccines. During an appearance on MSNBC's Morning Joe, Bedingfield told host Mika Brzezinski that there are conservative news outlets creating irresponsible content, sharing misinformation about the virus, and that social media platforms should be held accountable for allowing them to do so. She did not name the specific conservative news outlets. In October 2020, Bedingfield, serving as deputy campaign manager and communications director for Joe Biden, told reporters that stories about Hunter Biden's laptop were Russian misinformation. She accused President Donald Trump specifically, quote, "I think we need to be very, very clear that what he's doing is amplifying Russian misinformation." You see, this is how it works. I'm telling the truth because I am a trusted authority. If you disagree with me, you are spreading misinformation. How do you get that? QED. Misinformation. Stop it with the misinformation. The Biden campaign applauded social media companies like Twitter and Facebook for suppressing stories about the laptop and even blocking the news outlets that published those stories, though the stories later turned out to be true. After the campaign, Hunter Biden revealed that he was the target of an FBI investigation. Stories continue to emerge from the laptop based on emails and documents that reveal the web of Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings and Joe Biden's connection to some of them, contradicting his claims not to know about his family's business dealing. Hunter Biden has never denied the authenticity of the laptop, which he took to a repair shop in Delaware and abandoned. This from Hannah Blow. A columnist for the Washington Post admitted Tuesday that Senator Rand Paul was correct in Tuesday's heated back and forth between the senator and Dr. Fauci over the White House chief medical advisor's denial of the National Institutes of Health funding gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This from Josh Rogan. Hey guys, Rand Paul was right and Fauci was wrong. The NIH was funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan, but NIH pretended it didn't meet their gain-of-function definition to avoid their own oversight mechanism. Josh Rogan, a columnist for the Washington Post, said Tuesday, "Sorry, not sorry, if that doesn't fit your favorite narrative." No, it's not gain-of-function research. How can you say that it's not gain-of-function research? I am Dr. Fauci. I determine what gain-of-function research means. That's pretty much what he's saying. That's pretty much what he is saying. And congratulations to Josh Rogan for pointing this out. I wonder if he's going to be accused of spreading misinformation. This is from David Marcus of the New York Post. A fresh wave of deaths and hospitalizations, like the ones that crippled the country last year, loom on the horizon if people don't wise up and get vaccinated against COVID-19, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell warned. These shots need to get in everyone's arms as rapidly as possible. We're going to be back in a situation in the fall that we don't yearn for, that we went through last year, McConnell said yesterday, adding, "This is not complicated." Asked about comments from Utah Governor Spencer Cox alleging that conservative pundits are killing people with their rhetoric, McConnell stated that he encourages everybody to ignore all of these other voices that are giving demonstrably bad advice. McConnell's call to seek trusted and verified information about the virus and vaccines mirrors White House efforts this past week to counter false information that they say is spreading on social media and cable news. McConnell took to Twitter to promote his pro-vaccination remarks, tweeting a portion of them with the words "Get vaccinated" at the top of the tweet. A new Axios Ipsos poll highlights the difficulties that government officials have had in convincing a significant segment of the American population to take the jab. Of the unvaccinated respondents to that poll, fully half say they are not at all likely to take it. The Canadian government is running a commercial several times a day on several different channels. And someone asks, how did these wonderful vaccines get created so quickly? And there's a number of answers that are given. One answer that is not given is that the drug companies were given blanket immunity from lawsuits, any harm done to them because of failures of the vaccine. Blanket immunity. And of course, the Canadian government isn't going to mention that because it's the sort of thing that tends to make people suspicious. And this is from KCAL in Los Angeles. A new surge in COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations is again taking a toll on Los Angeles area restaurants, which throughout the region are already struggling to staff up to meet the high demand for dine-in meals. But now they are being hit disproportionately hard by the rise in new infections, especially among people who are unvaccinated. Oh, especially among people who are unvaccinated. I'll get back to that. This week, both Bottega Louie in West Hollywood and Village Idiot LA. Why would anyone call their restaurant Village Idiot LA? In the Melrose area, announced temporary closures due to COVID-19 on Instagram. The Village Idiot said it would close for a few days after a fully vaccinated staff member tested positive for the virus. I remember, I think it was 1980, I was talking to a friend about this distressing, lamentable trend of nightclubs, music establishments, giving themselves whimsical names. And we thought, what would be the most inane name that we could come up with for such a place? And I don't know whether it was me or him, probably him, said Shenanigans. And a few months later, a place opened up or was renamed as Shenanigans. This is from the Daily Mail. A Texas Democrat pictured prominently without a mask on a private jet last week, fleeing to Washington, D.C., is now calling for universal face coverings regardless of vaccination status after she and 5 others in the group tested positive for COVID-19. We need to follow the science here, Texas Representative Donna Howard tweeted Wednesday. Texas needs to change course and allow for universal mask wearing to prevent spread of the highly contagious Delta variant, especially as children under 12 cannot get vaccinated yet. Another one of the runaway Democrats announced Tuesday she is running for Congress against Republican incumbent Beth Van Dyne, who represents Congressional District 24, which falls between Dallas and Fort Worth. Texas State Representative Michelle Beckley released a video from her $200 a day hotel room in the nation's capital, where she called herself brave for fleeing Texas to stop Republicans from passing 2 voter rights bills. My name is Michelle Beckley. I'm one of the brave Texas Democrats who came to D.C. to fight for voting rights in my state. Now I'm flipping a seat held by an anti-democracy Republican, she tweeted Wednesday after releasing her campaign video. She then urged more people to follow her. I have 28,500. Can you get us to 50,000 followers? Well, it seems to me that the incumbent there, Van Dyne, merely has to show that picture over and over again of this stupid woman grinning on the private jet, not wearing a mask, and oh yeah, we've been exposed to COVID now. How did that happen? I mean, that should do it. That's the only commercial she needs. Just play that over and over and over again. Van Dyne responded on Fox News Wednesday, democracy is actually when you get elected showing up and doing your job. I think democracy is if you are an elected official, you have to show up. When you are an empty seat, they have no voice. I'm up here in Washington right now doing my job. It's estimated the cost to keep the few dozen lawmakers in D.C. Through the special legislative session, which ends August the 7th, sits around $1.5 million, according to one of the Texas Democrats. Howard and the around 60 other runaways did not mask up for the trip on their private jets chartered at $100,000, despite a CDC and recommending people still mask up on planes, trains, and buses. I'm looking at a picture of Michelle Beckley here, and she is a large woman with multicolored hair. I wonder how well that will go down in the district between Dallas and Fort Worth. On Friday, one lawmaker tested positive for coronavirus, followed by two more on Saturday morning. When the weekend was through, a total of 6 lawmakers had tested positive for coronavirus. All 6, the Texas Democratic Caucus said, were vaccinated. But no, that can't happen. That's literally impossible. Howard, whose state district is in Austin, was the 6th and latest to test positive. She is a former nurse who helped determine safety protocols for lawmakers after an initial COVID-19 case was reported Friday. Following the positive test on Monday, Howard said she is, quote, basically asymptomatic, unquote, and plans to isolate. Asymptomatic? No, but this is the deadly Delta variant. How could she be basically asymptomatic? That can't happen. Despite following CDC guidelines and being fully vaccinated, I tested positive for COVID-19 Monday. She said the Delta variant seems to be much more contagious, even for those vaccinated, than initially thought. Thankfully, I'm vaccinated and feeling well, she added, but this variant is hitting the unvaccinated with severe illnesses and hospitalizations. You see what's going on here? Again, she is making this claim that the mRNA jabs are palliatives. They are not palliatives. They are supposed to be prophylactics. And clearly, in these cases, they have failed. But now it's, the memo went out. Oh, yes, I was fully vaccinated and I got COVID-19, but I'm pretty chipper because the vaccine does a bang-up job of treating COVID-19 after you get it, which is just an outrageous bait and switch. But you will recall, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, Joe Biden actually uttered the phrase, the big lie. Or maybe that was not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki. Lockdown Skeptics is now called Daily Skeptic, and you can find it at Daily Skeptic with a C, not a K.org. Premier League players and staff also face mandatory vaccination. Iceland, that's a chain of grocery stores in England, forced to hire thousands more staff because of pingdemic shortage. Supermarket chain Iceland is having to recruit 2,000 backup staff to stave off disruption caused by the pingdemic, after government told businesses that they should not be encouraging staff to break isolation. Iceland has been forced to reduce opening hours and to shut some stores due to staff being told to stay at home by the NHS COVID app. And vaccines not protecting over 60s in Scotland from being hospitalized with COVID-19. A reader, an academic economist, has analyzed the Scottish COVID data and reached a depressing conclusion. COVID vaccination seems to offer the over 60s little protection from severe illness. Prime Minister faces rebellion in Parliament over vaccine passports, but decision will likely lie with Labour. I'm going to be talking about Tom Bauer's biography of Boris Johnson on Friday on the book club. And I don't know, this is a man who's never gone to jail, but I'm rather struggling to think of an example of a prominent person as recklessly irresponsible as Boris Johnson has been throughout his entire life. And I'm drawing a blank. This is a man who routinely refers to himself as a libertarian who knows the deal about COVID-19 and has known it from the beginning, but he really can't stand people disagreeing with him. He really takes it personally. And so it's up to Labour. Well, I think the Labour Party has made it clear. Oh, no, wait. According to Jessica Alcott, new Labour will oppose vaccine passports, now a real chance of a government defeat. A Labour spokesperson said it's costly, open to fraud, and is impractical. Being double jabbed doesn't prove you aren't carrying the virus. Well, you'll recall, it was a little less than a year ago, well, that our Prime Minister Trudeau and Boris Johnson and all these others said, come on, hang in there, people. We just have to get the vaccine. Then we can go back to normal. And, one jab isn't enough. You need two. Apparently 2 jabs isn't enough. And 2 jabs, being double jabbed, doesn't prove you aren't carrying the virus. The great betrayal. Destroy their education, destroy their jobs and their job prospects, destroy their social life, their friendships, their mental health, force them to work long hours at school or in physically demanding jobs in uncomfortable and breath-inhibiting face masks. That's what our country has done to our young people in the past 16 months. Why? In an attempt, and not a very successful one, to protect a small minority of mostly elderly folk who are particularly vulnerable to one disease, while we wait in limbo to develop a vaccine and roll it out to the vulnerable population. Then do we give them back their freedom? Not at all. Then we move the goalposts, making freedom conditional on more and more people getting the vaccine, until we make it to so-called Freedom Day a month later than originally planned, and Boris Johnson chooses then to tell young people that their freedom to do the things they enjoy will be dependent on receiving a vaccine. A vaccine that uses experimental technology and was rushed through trials without waiting for the full safety data, trials which will never now conclude as the control groups have been vaccinated. A vaccine, or rather vaccines, which the authorities now acknowledge increase the risk of dangerous blood clotting and heart conditions, particularly in young people. Vaccines for which there are now more reports of fatalities in the US than all the other vaccines put together for the past 30 years. Mandatory face masks and advice to work from home should be reintroduced to keep figures under control, say sage scientists. And here's a picture of Boris Johnson standing at a lectern that says hands. Oh, there's pictograms. Hands, like wash your hands, face, mask, space. What did they say? When did first of all, politicians, I guess did Tony Blair invent this? That your lectern has to have some slogan, some buzzword on it. But apparently slogans, I don't know, they require people to be able to read. So now we have pictograms instead. And freedom of speech is under attack. This is according to barrister and libertarian Francis Hoare and Lawrence Fox's Reclaim Party. And as always, we conclude this segment by looking at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. And it's, yes, somehow the vaccine death count from the CDC was 12,313. And then they said, no, it's not over 12,000. It's 6,079. Strange. Berenson tweets, repeated mRNA vaccinations are 100% effective at preventing serious injury to Moderna stock. Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, who was one of the most draconian lockdown enthusiasts, tweeted today, "We are back over 300 confirmed COVID hospitalizations for the first time since June the 25th. We've come too far to go backward. The vaccines are proving more than 99.99 effective against hospitalization. Get vaccinated and let's end this." Berenson responds, 99.99% at preventing hospitalizations, I tell you. Maybe 99.999. Who knows? That's why hospitalizations are rising so fast in states where so many people are vaccinated. Makes sense, right? Right? Anybody? But again, the bait and switch. Oh, sure. People got jabbed twice and they still got COVID-19. And we're seeing an awful lot of cases of this, but it's a palliative. You'll get the disease, but you won't really suffer. Whereas the people who are unvaccinated, ooh, they're in serious trouble. And I'm sorry, but it's too late. Alabama doctor tells unvaccinated. And now all you really see is their fear and their regret. And even though I may walk through the room thinking, okay, this is your fault, Dr. Brittany Kobia is a hospitalist, whatever that means, at Grandview Medical Center in Birmingham. She looks pleased as punch in the photograph from al.com. Perhaps they could have found a different photograph from her for her. Berenson comments, "So you can say whatever you like on Facebook. It doesn't make it true, especially if you go easy on details. Here's something true. In all of Israel, a population approximately 9 million, 7 people under 40 have been hospitalized with severe COVID in the last 2 weeks. That's vaccinated, not healthy, ill everyone. With very rare exceptions, COVID just doesn't kill people under 40. It never has. And barring a super variant, it never will. Where we have recent real data from the United Kingdom and Israel, the trend is clear. Older people are getting sick again. Here's something else true. A lot of stories like this, COVID parties, dying medical residents, Trump fans apologizing with their last breath, rocketed around last year. They were almost universally bunk. Maybe this one's real. A first time for everything. Let's go back to the chat. Oh, cow is even a typical term of denigration for us going way back. Okay. Didn't Bojo break a restaurant window by throwing a bottle at it? Something like that. I do know that, according to Tom Bauer's book, he wrestled on the floor with David Cameron over a briefing document. I believe that this was for funding for a Crossrail, something like that in London. And so Cameron had been instructed by his bureaucrats, to offer this much at the beginning. And then when Johnson objected, it wasn't enough, to raise it to this amount of money and stop there. Foolishly, Cameron had on, the outside of a folder. And so Johnson saw, what his negotiating strategy was going to be. And he went to grab it from Cameron, and Cameron pulled back and it fell on the floor. And the two of them were wrestling on the floor over this. But of course, David Cameron was not a member of POP at Eton. And Boris Johnson seriously believes that this proves his lifelong superiority over Cameron. I mean, I don't hold any brief for David Cameron, but this is just so inane. Anran says, lockdown enthusiast, such a simple but wonderful way to put it. I hadn't heard that before. Oh, well, thank you for the praise. Dan says, this totally negates the concept of a vax pass. Bob Paxson says, love my New Jersey governor, like the clap. Anran says, Kevin, a hospitalist is a doctor who works exclusively on inpatients in a hospital. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. The variants are supposed to be more infectious, says Texas Viral Hog. This should be a concern. Well, it's only really a concern, I suppose, if young people without comorbidities begin to die in significant numbers. Oh yes, Boris Johnson was a member of the Bullingdon Club, which is something like out of Evelyn Waugh's first novel, Decline and Fall. And Bullingdon Club, meetings, they would have a meal and get rip-roaring drunk, and then stumble around Oxford, breaking things, destroying people's rooms, trashing restaurants, and the like. And amusingly, as Bauer points out, that since Boris Johnson doesn't even like to pay for his own drinks, the other members of the Bullingdon Club realized that it was fruitless to attempt to get any money from him to pay the damages. That's not what an honorable man would do. If you're in a club and one of your recreations is to break stuff and then you pay for the damages, well, then you have to pay for the damages. Oh, my family isn't very wealthy, then maybe you shouldn't be a member of the Bullingdon Club. Okay, what else do we have here from the Orange Man Gone? Mission accomplished. Now they're just trying to walk it all back slowly without looking like total fraud, says Emma Nimpton. I said before, I'm not very good at short-term predictions, which is why I've largely stopped making them. I had assumed, like a lot of people, that after Joe Biden was inaugurated and with the vaccines in hand, Biden would say, and it would be, spread to the media, which would repeat it, okay, the crisis is over, and with my outstanding leadership, we're going to be distributing the vaccine. So, it's time to get back to work, America, and we're going to build back better. And America's going to be better than ever. Instead, they decided to ramp up the hysteria in order to own the Trumpists. Or perhaps it's simply that the panic, it got away from them. It's another possible explanation. And job shortage equals less than 20 applicants per open position, says Emma Nimpton. That I don't think anyone knows what is going on is gatekeeper, says Oscar Toe. No, I mean, I remember the Carter administration, which seemed rather farcical at the time. Of course, a lot of reporters made fun of the Carter administration, but they're not making fun of the Biden administration because, they're partisans. That's what they are. But it just seems to be, farcical. Mary Crow says, America is ruled by lies. Truth is completely absent, and the American people tolerate it. Ruled by lies is now the American way. That is a quotation from Paul Craig Roberts. The German pointer says, convenience, however, is only ever short term. In the long term, it leads to the bloodiest of inconveniences. No Use said, just came from watching a Harvard MBA course on YouTube. LOL, God save us. Metal Mike says, Ontario announced that it required 90% of the population to be double vaxxed before they will reopen. Is that going to happen? I suspect they're going to have to lie about this, or they're going to have to dragoon people off the street, and drag them to a vaccination center. Or maybe they can just start paying people $10,000 each to get vaccinated, to get double vaccinated. Of course, the people who got double vaccinated without getting paid are going to demand their $10,000 as well. I wouldn't put it past them, maybe not $10,000, but just outright, just start paying people. Forget lotteries and Xboxes and free burgers and beers and joints. The German pointer says a small business discriminating against people because these people didn't get a big pharma corporation's product put into their veins. And okay, let's get back to it here. Oh yes, Wither Haiti. I thought, is that, the old joke about the most boring headline ever? But I came across an opinion piece in the New York Times And the New York Times is increasingly my go-to URL for humor, for inadvertent humor. This is a piece by Annette Gordon-Reed, who is described as a professor of law and American history, and the author, most recently, of On Juneteenth. I wonder how long she had that in the pipeline for, or whether she managed to, crank out a book in, I don't know, a few weeks. Let's see, born in 1958, she is currently the Carl M. Loeb University professor at Harvard University. She has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for History and the National Book Award for Nonfiction, and 15 other prizes in 2009 for her work on the Hemings family of Monticello. In 2010, she received the National Humanities Medal and a MacArthur Fellowship, aka Genius Grant. Okay, you can look this woman up on your own. But okay, we owe Haiti a debt we can't repay. Is this woman originally from Haiti? Is her family from Haiti? No pun intended, but Haiti is a black hole of stupidity and corruption. And why the United States would want to entangle itself once again in Haitian affairs is a question for which there is no possible answer. Professor Gordon Reed begins, when assassins killed President Jovenel Moise of Haiti July 7th, pushing the country to the brink of chaos, it may have struck many Americans as the latest in a string of political upheavals and destabilizing disasters in an unfortunate country with which the United States should have little to do. But the revelation that two of the suspects were American citizens was a reminder of the complicated history of our relations with Haiti, a needlessly tragic history driven by self-interest and the politics of, wait for it, racism. As the United States now offers to help Haiti restore political order, it should be kept squarely in mind that Haiti is more than just a troubled neighbor. It is a nation whose revolutionary fight for freedom helped make the United States the country that it is today. That is one of the most outrageous lies that I've ever heard. Oh, so how about this? People interfering in Haitian affairs are American citizens. How many paper American citizens are there around the world? How many millions of them? I remember some years ago, there was a trouble in Lebanon, and the Canadian government announced that it was going to airlift all Canadian citizens from Lebanon. And wait, how many tens of thousands of so-called Canadians live in Lebanon? Because obviously they had got Canadian citizenship just to treat our country as a bolt hole. But back to the professor. In 1791, the enslaved people of Haiti, then known as Saint-Domingue, engineered the first and only successful slave revolt in modern history. This was France's richest colony, made so by the worldwide demand for sugar and the slavery-based economy that fulfilled it. Did you know that the use of sugar is racist now? Yep, it is. Led by Toussaint Louverture, Africans on the island violently threw off their enslavers, whose countrymen themselves had only recently overthrown a monarchy that had oppressed people for generations. For reasons both strategic and principled, in early 1794, the French government accepted the declaration of the end of slavery made by the rebels in August 1793. Some in France saw abolition as in keeping with their own revolutionary ideals. This period is popularly known as the Age of Revolution. First came the Americans. Yes, first came the Americans. So how on earth could Haiti slaughtering all of the white people somehow make the United States the country that it is today? First came the Americans, aided by the French in 1776. The French followed with the fall of the Bastille in 1789. Thomas Jefferson, an ardent supporter of the French Revolution and still under its spell, wrote to his daughter Martha in 1793 as if the events in Haiti were part of an unstoppable wave sweeping the globe. Quote, St. Domingo has expelled all its whites, has given freedom to all its blacks, has established a regular government of the blacks and colored people, and seems now to have taken its ultimate form, and that to which all of the West India Islands must come, unquote. Well, here's a reminder about Thomas Jefferson. He was kind of cracked. Thomas Jefferson was such a supporter of the French Revolution, even into the Reign of Terror, that he once wrote that it would be better that the entire human race were reduced to two people, Adam and Eve, than that the French Revolution fail. Yes. Americans watch these proceedings closely, says the professor. And then we get Napoleon. And apparently the meanies in the United States refused to recognize Haiti until 1862, after the southern states seceded from this union. Despite this formal recognition, after the assassination of President Vilbrun Guillaume Sam in 1915, the United States occupied the island until 1934. Why? Think of how different its prospects would have been had Haiti been fully embraced from the very beginning instead of reviled, and if Haitians hadn't been forced in 1825, in one of the most disgraceful details in the history of the oppression of Haiti, to pay reparations to their enslavers and their heirs, their heirs, because they slaughtered them in exchange for official recognition. The reparations created a crushing debt that blighted the country's future. Throughout this history, race was at the heart of the matter, as even Jefferson in his old age acknowledged. The Haitians, who suffered enormously for the victory in the early years of the 19th century, and who were treated so poorly by Americans and Europeans for decades after that, gave the people and the government of the United States a generally unrecognized benefit. Writing in History of the United States during the administrations of Thomas Jefferson, Henry Adams said it plainly: the prejudice of race alone blinded the American people to the debt they owed to the desperate courage of 500,000 Haitian Negroes who would not be enslaved. Americans' debt to the Haitian people may never be repaid, but if we are supposed to learn to be able from history, we should be obliged in true good faith to try. Yes. So America must get itself involved in the swamp, in the morass of Haiti, which is a country which at its outset consecrated itself to the devil. Did you know that? It's true. This is from a piece on the website Truth or Consequences, and it's by Tom Barrett. Haiti is the only country in the entire world that has dedicated its government to Satan. Demonic spirits have been consulted for political decisions and have shaped the country's history. Thus speaks Reverend Doug Anderson, who grew up in Haiti with missionary parents and served there along with his wife Dawn as a missionary until 1990. The leaders of Haiti make no attempt to hide their allegiance to Satan. Haiti's government is a government of the devil, by the devil, and for the devil. It is a matter of well-documented historical fact that the nation of Haiti was dedicated to Satan 200 years ago. That would be 200 years before 2004. On August the 14th, 1791, a group of Hungans, or voodoo priests, led by a former slave Hungan named Bookman, made a pact with the devil at a place called Bois Cayman. All present vowed to exterminate all of the white Frenchmen on the island. They sacrificed a black pig in a voodoo ritual at which hundreds of slaves drank the pig's blood. In this ritual, Bookman asked Satan for his help in liberating Haiti from the French. In exchange, the voodoo priests offered to give the country to Satan for 200 years and swore to serve him. On January the 1st, 1804, the nation of Haiti was born, and thus began a new demonic tyranny. At the time of the pact, Haiti was France's richest colony and was known as the Pearl of the Antilles for its singular beauty. But it soon became one of the world's poorest and most benighted nations. Scoffers may say there is no connection between the fact that Haiti was the richest nation in the hemisphere and then became the poorest after selling its national soul to Satan. But these scoffers can't come up with a better explanation. Voodoo is a practice based on a mixture of African spiritism and witchcraft. Depending on the source of one's research, between 75 and 90% of Haitians practice voodoo. This seems to fly in the face of the fact that the country is predominantly Catholic, but like their African ancestors, voodoo practitioners have no problem embracing multiple religions. In fact, most who practice voodoo believe they must be Catholic first. Until recently, voodoo was practiced in secret. Practitioners would go to the Catholic Church on Sunday and attend voodoo ceremonies deep in the woods at other times. Voodoo was forbidden during the colonial times, and the 32 Haitian governments that followed independence also suppressed the practice because of world condemnation. But on April the 8th, 2003, President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was installed by the United States of America, approved voodoo as an officially recognized religion in Haiti. Voodoo priests can now perform marriages and other ceremonies previously reserved for Christian religions. An ancestral religion, voodoo is an essential part of national identity, Aristide said in the decree recognizing voodoo. Aristide has been a controversial figure since he became the first freely elected president in Haiti's history in 1991, 200 years after the nation was dedicated to Satan. A defrocked Catholic priest, Aristide was expelled in 1988 from his order, the Salesians. He was a hero of the resistance to Haitian tyranny, then president, then exiled, then restored to the presidency by his close friend, Bill Clinton. One of his first acts was to express his support for reinstating the Voodoo Pact that expired the year he was elected. He claimed that voodoo was the national religion and a source of national pride. Even before Aristide came to power, a U.S. embassy official in Port-au-Prince described Aristide as a, quote, Marxist maniac, unquote. Newsweek magazine called him the flaky father Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and none other than Henry Kissinger declared that he was a psychotic. While it is true that Aristide used communism to gain power, I don't believe he is psychotic. What many see as madness is simply the pure evil that emanates from the man. And again, this is from a site called Truth or Consequences. And the piece is by Tom Barrett, and it is called Government of the Devil, by the Devil, and for the Devil. Let's talk about coffee. Coffee. Everyone loves coffee, right? Actually, I don't drink it myself. I don't like the taste, and it doesn't sit well with me. This is a piece on revolver.news. How Black Rifle Coffee used every trick in the book to fool conservatives. Once again, patriots are learning the hard way that when you tether your identity to a for-profit institution, you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. Black Rifle Coffee Company was supposed to be a company that countered the effete stereotypes of other coffee sellers. When Starbucks promised to hire refugees, BRCC pledged to hire veterans. The company ran a promotion donating free bags of coffee to police officers. Its products are adorned in pro-military, pro-police kitsch. Black Rifle was supposed to be the rare company willing to openly market to the majority of America that doesn't enjoy riots, protesting the flag, 13-year-olds getting castrations or double mastectomies, and every other piece of the ideological package that has become America's de facto ruling ideology. Psych! Black Rifle actually hates populists and conservatives. In fact, it's willing to pay you to never be their customer again. That's the takeaway from the company's 7,000-word profile in the New York Times last week. Sometime in the last few months, the New York Times asked Black Rifle if they'd be interested in an interview. As a proud MAGA-backing coffee company, Black Rifle could have responded in several different ways. 1, ignore them. 2, deliver a terse statement. 3, ask for a list of questions and give brief, accurate answers. And 4, the Times is the enemy of the American people. F off. Black Rifle did none of those things. Instead, founder Eben Hafer sat down for a wide-ranging in-person interview. The company posed for a photo shoot. They gave the Times' Jason Zengirl everything he needed for a massive story, making it absolutely clear how the company really feels about its most enthusiastic supporters. Quote, the Rittenhouse episode may have cost the company thousands of customers, but Hafer believed it also allowed Black Rifle to draw a line in the sand. It's such a repugnant group of people, Hafer said. It's like the worst of American society, and I got to flush the toilet of some of those people that kind of hijacked portions of the brand. Then after, what Hafer insisted was a super clear delineation was not too clear to everyone, as Munchel's choice of headgear vividly demonstrated. The racism expletive really pisses me off, Hafer said. I hate racist, Proud Boy-ish people. Like, I'll pay them to leave my customer base. I would gladly chop all of those people out of my effing customer database and pay them to get the F out. Hafer's choice of epithet is revealing. One doesn't even have to like the Proud Boys to know that calling them racist is ridiculous. The group's leader is sometime FBI informant Enrique Tarrio, an Afro-Cuban. It famously attracts Hispanics, Asians, and Polynesians. The Proud Boys are all male and proud Western chauvinists. Hafer could have called them violent or stupid or a potential federal op, but instead he chose to call them racists, the one slur against them that is completely indefensible. In other words, Hafer doesn't actually know anything about the Proud Boys. He's just repeating nonsense talking points fed to him by the right's enemies, whom he evidently views as a reliable information source. This is from the New York Times. Hafer and Best were talking in a glorified supply closet in their Salt Lake City offices, where potential designs for new coffee bags were hanging on the wall. One of them featured a Renaissance-style rendering of St. Michael the Archangel, a patron saint of military personnel, shooting a short-barreled rifle. In Afghanistan and Iraq, Hafer knew a number of squad mates who had a St. Michael tattoo. For a time, he wore into battle a St. Michael pendant that a Catholic friend gave him. But while the St. Michael design was being mocked up, Hafer said he learned from a friend at the Pentagon that an image of St. Michael trampling on Satan had been embraced by white supremacists because it was reminiscent of the murder of George Floyd. Now any plans for the coffee bag had been scrapped. This won't see the light of day, Hafer said. Revolver comments, St. Michael the Archangel has been essential to the Christian religion for 2,000 years. Millions of Catholics say a prayer to St. Michael after Mass. As Hafer himself knows, St. Michael is popular with soldiers, veterans, and religious Americans of all stripes. But rather than letting a classic symbol stand on its own terms, Hafer has allowed the hegemonic left to define what it means. A friend at the Pentagon warned him that a 2,000-year-old iconic symbol was not okay because a few alleged white supremacists embraced it, whatever that means. So too bad, no more iconic Christian saint allowed anymore. What other symbols Hafer could be browbeaten to opposing? The Gadsden flag, the American one. It appears the only limit is the Pentagon's shame, and given the Pentagon at this moment is paying to surgically mutilate its own soldiers, it's not clear any such limit exists. Well, you know, it is a very bad idea for people to somehow link their identity to a commercial product. I've been amused for decades when I see people walking around, wearing T-shirts or other items of clothing that are simply advertisements for a brand, turning yourself into a walking billboard. That is many people's identity, and it is it's distressing and sad. I hear something that is neither distressing nor sad. It is from Adam Mano from the Daily Mail. Marvel's Black Widow is on track to be one of the lowest grossing Marvel movies after a second week box office plunge of 67%, with some experts worried that Marvel fatigue has set in. The Scarlett Johansson-led film made just a $26.3 million last weekend compared to $80.3 million on the weekend beginning July the 9th, marking the steepest second week drop for a Marvel film distributed by Disney. The release of the action flick, directed by Kate Shortland and filmed in 2019, suffered from fits and starts as the promo cycle was interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It was finally released simultaneously in theaters on Disney Plus for $30 earlier this month. I assumed this would be a bigger, more consistent hit, Disney expert and commentator Josh Spiegel told the Washington Post. If Black Widow can only do what it did in its second weekend, there's a part of me that says people may be a little tired of Marvel. That should make a Disney worried. Though Black Widow's numbers may seem huge compared to most films, they pale in comparison to the hundreds of millions raked in by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The highest grossing movie in the franchise is Avengers Endgame, which grossed $357 million in its opening weekend and went on to gross $858 million in the U.S. for a worldwide gross of $2.7 billion. The simultaneous streaming and theater pandemic release may have played a hand in Black Widow's underperformance, said equity research analyst Alicia Reese. I think what this shows that if you're making a movie available quickly for free on streaming, people will just wait, said Reese, who works at investment firm Wedbush Securities. If Disney goes back to the traditional model, I think people will be less patient and come back to the theater. For your $30, did you get a souvenir program? I'm really surprised that they're not doing this. Hey, look, I have my program. I went to the theater to see it. Disney may not have time to sulk, considering Phase 4 of the MCU will spawn as many as 24 series and movies through 2023. The MCU kicked off with 2008's Iron Man, starring Robert Downey Jr. Let's see. I haven't seen Black Widow, and I'm not going to see Black Widow. I don't go to MCU or DC Cinematic Universe movies. I'm not all that fan of explosions, crummy CGI, or really boring origin stories, rather. So-and-so has a name. Oh, yes, he's called Han Solo because he was solo. Han Solo calls him Chewie rather than Chewbacca because Chewbacca is too much to say, and Chewie is a syllable shorter. I just feel so much better having learned all that. So there's some good news for you. Let's talk about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And again, I will repeat that the thing about this ongoing scandal, fiasco, that most annoys me is that it's forced me onto the same side as Piers Morgan, who writes in the Mail, the Queen Mother had a strict maxim for royal conduct: never complain, never explain, and rarely be heard speaking in public. It worked very well for her, ensuring that when she died, aged 101, it was as a deeply beloved figure in Britain and around the world. Her daughter, Queen Elizabeth, has followed a similar maxim, and it's worked very well for her too, as she's become the most respected and longest-serving monarchs in history without ever giving a single interview. But the Queen's grandson, Prince Harry, sadly did not get the discretion memo. Or if he did, he rejected it in favor of the new strategy: always complain, always explain, and never stop yapping, whining, preaching, and trashing your family. Now, just when we assumed that the man who insisted he had to leave Britain to protect his privacy had exhausted every lucrative avenue of invading his own privacy, he's written his memoirs. The news sparked yet another torrent of headlines, and my own gut reaction, says Piers Morgan, posted on Twitter, probably summed up most people's response when they first heard about it: you've got to be effing joking. But then I realized it's not actually that surprising. Why would someone whose only currency now is airing dirty laundry about his family to any media entity that will pay him enough not write a book flinging yet more mud at them? To be blunt, Harry's a sellout, and this is just another example of him selling out. There is a website called harrymarkle.wordpress.com, described as traditional British pro-monarchy satire. The tale of how a prince was conned and made to look a fool by a grifter. Yes, Random House tweets, breaking news. Random House is honored to announce a forthcoming memoir by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, to be published globally in late 2022. That's a year and a half from now. Why would it take so long? So the author of this website says, back in January 2021, I was contacted with information that Harry had written a book with the aid of a ghostwriter, and that it would be a memoir that specifically would focus on the death of his mother, Diana. The usual information came from someone working on the book at Random House, but I chose to keep that quiet so as not to get them fired. Things have taken a turn since then, as we have had the Oprah Winfrey interview and the Apple therapy session, where the content included specific attacks on members of the royal family, the crown itself, and those who worked in the royal household. The fact is that the royal family must face the truth that Harry has turned his back on them and the crown. In short, he can be considered a traitor. The book had already been written and was being proofed back in January. What were they waiting for? Perhaps they wanted to see if they retained the patronages and honorary titles. Maybe they wanted to see the outcome of the Daily Mail defamation case. I had shared this information and put it in the public domain so that the men in gray and Buckingham Palace could read this and act on it. So we have, in December 2020, all of these things happened. Spotify Archwell audio deal announced, Archwell trademark approved in the USA, Archwell audio trademark applied for in the USA, Archwell Foundation trademark applied for in the USA, Archwell Productions trademark applied for in UK, Archwell Audio airs the first podcast, Archwell Organization website is launched on the last day of the tax year in the USA. Now, this is spelled Archewell, and of course, Harry and Meghan Mertz named their allegedly first child Archie. No, not Archibald, but Archie. So I don't know that anyone knows for certain whether it's supposed to be pronounced Archwell or Archie. Well, and in January 21, the word on the street is that Harry has written a book via a ghostwriter, of course, on the truth behind Diana, which ties in with the Archwell theme of playing the dead Diana card again. It is unknown if the Queen, Buckingham Palace, or members of the royal family are aware of the book. Surely this act must lead to his coffin being encased in concrete. Oh yes, proceeds will be donated to charity. It doesn't actually say all proceeds, and this could mean a percentage. The ambiguous statement is obviously there to alleviate accusations of cashing in, but he is cashing in by using it for publicity. Is Harry fascinating? Not really, because without his title and family connections, he's just a tall, ginger millennial who has no skills and who hasn't proven to be bright. Can Harry be considered influential? Well, if you want to know how to diss your family, then he's doing a pretty good job there. But who he is influencing and what is he influencing? If they mean the travelist thing, then that's just eco-preaching. And if it means the army, well, he didn't excel there and opted to go to the Lion King premiere and not the Deal Memorial. So he is influential in inspiring people to be loyal to the military, or maybe not. A lot of people feel as the author of this website do, and of course, this feeling becomes stronger with each month. He concludes, considering Harry's behavior of late, we can effectively dismiss any notion of reconciliation or truce with this announcement. The man he has become is nothing to be proud about. There will be no white flags being waved, but red ones in anger and to bait the men in gray and Charles. Besides, what has Harry actually learned? Memoirs are when you have had experience and can reflect on life lessons. He is still making mistakes, and some huge ones that he can't see. In the end, Harry is cashing in on his royal titles, cashing in on his mother's death, and is validating it by claiming he is a victim who has suffered at the hands of the monarchy and the poor parenting he received, and that his father's parents are to blame. There is only one course of action if the House of Windsor wishes to survive. The ducal title must be revoked. The HRH style must be revoked. Harry must be removed from the line of succession, and any legitimate issue should lose their place as well. Yes, I like the use of that phrase, legitimate issue, because everything involving the two alleged children that Harry is said to have fathered and that Meghan Mertz is said to have birthed, everything about it is strange and mysterious, and for the most part, not creditable. It just isn't. Given that there's a line of succession issue here. This is why these things take place, these births take place semi-publicly. Because, anyone can claim that they've had a child, and there are various means to procure children. But if the succession follows from natural births, then, this needs to be demonstrated. And that's why these things are not kept a mystery. I've been neglecting Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State, but I'm going to return to that now. And his question is appendix on buying out. That is to say, buying out the capitalists. And Belloc does not believe that this is likely to happen. Belloc writes, the state can purchase thus on a small scale by subsidizing purchase out of the general taxation. It can therefore play this trick over a small area and for a short time with success. But the moment this area passes a very narrow limit, the market for investment is found to be restricted. Capital automatically takes alarm. The state can no longer offer its paper guarantees, save at an enhanced price. If it tries to turn the position by further raising taxation to what capital regards as confiscatory rates, there will be opposed to its action just the same forces as would be opposed to frank and open expropriation. The matter is one of plain arithmetic, and all the confusion introduced by the complex mechanism of finance can no more change the fundamental and arithmetical principles involved than can the accumulation of triangles in an ordnance survey reduce the internal angles of the latest triangle to less than 180 degrees. In fine, if you desire to confiscate, you must confiscate. You cannot outflank the enemy as financiers in the city and sharpers on the racecourse outflank the simpler of mankind, nor can you conduct the general process of expropriation upon a muddle-headed hope that somehow or other something will come out of nothing in the end. There are indeed two ways in which the state could expropriate without meeting the resistance that must be present against any attempt at confiscation. But the first of these ways is precarious, the second insufficient. They are as follows. 1, the state can promise the capitalist a larger yearly revenue than he is getting in the expectation that it, the state, can manage the business better than the capitalist, or that some future expansion will come to its aid. In other words, if the state makes a bigger profit out of the thing than the capitalist, it can buy out the capitalist, just as a private individual with similar business proposition can buy him out. But the converse of this is that if the state has calculated badly or has bad luck, it would find itself endowing the capitalists of the future instead of gradually extinguishing them. In this fashion, the state could have socialized without confiscation the railways of this country if it had taken them over 50 years ago, promising the then owners more than they were then obtaining. But if it had socialized the Hansom cab in the 90s, it would now be supporting in perpetuity that worthy but extinct type, the cab owner and his children forever, at the expense of the community. The second way in which the state can expropriate without confiscation is by annuity. It can say to such capitalists as have no heirs, or care little for their fate, if they have, you have only got so much time to live, and to enjoy your 30 pounds, will you take 50 pounds until you die? Upon the bargain being accepted, the state will, in process of time, though not immediately upon the death of the annuitant, become an unembarrassed owner of what had been the annuitant's share in the means of production. But the area over which this method can be exercised is a very small one. It is not of itself a sufficient instrument for the expropriation of any considerable field. I need hardly add that, as a matter of fact, the so-called socialist and confiscatory measures of our time have nothing to do with the problem here discussed. The state is indeed confiscating. That is, it is taxing in many cases in such a fashion as to impoverish the taxpayer and is lessening his capital rather than shearing his income. But it is not putting the proceeds into the means of production. It is either using them for immediate consumption in the shape of new official salaries or handing them over to another set of capitalists. But these practical considerations of the way in which sham socialist experiments are working belong to my next section, in which I should deal with the actual beginnings of the servile state in our midst. And tomorrow I will begin the final section, section 9, the servile state has begun. Let's talk about the Great Replacement, which of course is a terrible phrase associated with white supremacism. Further than that, it is disinformation because there is no such thing as a great replacement. However, I suppose it is happening if you think it a good thing. Senator Dick Durbin, this is from The Hill, a video, quote, "The demographics of America are not on the side of the Republican Party. The new voters in this country are moving away from them, away from Donald Trump, away from their party creed that they preach," unquote. Aaron McIntyre responded, "They're celebrating the thing that definitely isn't happening again." Yeah. If you think it's bad, it's a conspiracy theory. If you think it's good, then I suppose it is diversity triumphant. And in more entertainment news, this is from David Eng at Breitbart. Netflix lost nearly 500,000 subscribers in the US and Canada during the second quarter in a surprising consumer rebuke as the streamer continues to embrace left-wing politics and woke content, including a new slate of programming from Barack and Michelle Obama. Let's get to people with no entertainment experience whatsoever. How about Barack and Michelle Obama, who, as the proverbial joke has it, wouldn't recognize a joke if it punched them in the nose? Let's get them. Let's get them to develop programming for us. The exodus also reflects a growing public disenchantment with paid streaming services in general, but particularly Netflix, as Americans grow weary of rising prices and overhyped content while embracing other forms of entertainment post-lockdown. The streamer said that it had lost 430,000 subscribers domestically for the period, the first time it has bled subscribers in 2 years, when it lost 100,000 subscribers during the second quarter of 2019. Wall Street views subscriptions as the key indicator of Netflix's financial health because it's the best gauge of the company's future cash flow. In its earnings announcement, Netflix blamed the subscriber loss on seasonality and the already large size of its North American customer base. The streamer made no mention of its increasingly left-wing content, as well as the openly partisan public positions its executives have taken in recent months. Co-CEO Reed Hastings reportedly donated $3 million to help California Governor Gavin Newsom fight off the current recall effort, the largest amount at the time to stop the Republican recall fund. Both Hastings and co-CEO Ted Sarandos backed Joe Biden's bid for the White House. Earlier this year, the Obamas announced they are turning the migration and refugee-themed novel Exit West into a movie for Netflix as part of their overall deal with the streamer. The former first couple recently released a 10-part animated series, We the People, a woke reimagining of Schoolhouse Rock. American consumers appear to be reevaluating their relationships with Netflix post-lockdown. As Breitbart News reported, a recent survey showed nearly one-third of respondents are planning on canceling the streaming services they are currently using once the U.S. fully reopens. Among respondents seeking to cancel their streaming services, 46% said Netflix is getting canceled, while 34% said Hulu, another 34% said Amazon Prime. Many respondents also said they were unimpressed with hype shows like Tiger King, I Care a Lot, and Bridgerton. I haven't seen the last two, but I did see Tiger King, which proves once again that truth is stranger than fiction. For the quarter, the company reported global subscriber growth of 1.54 million, the vast majority of which came from Asia. That represents a significant slowdown from last year when the company rocketed to new subscriber heights due to the Chinese coronavirus pandemic. Netflix also fell short of earnings expectations. Netflix has apologized for a provocative promotional poster for the film called Cuties, which follows a prepubescent girl who becomes fascinated with a twerking dance crew. The poster, featuring 4 girls in risque poses, sparked widespread backlash, prompting Netflix to apologize for what it called inappropriate artwork. I've never understood Netflix business model, particularly, the amount of money that they're borrowing, and particularly the stupendous amount of money they're handing out to creators. I mean, they're pretty much going to have to sign up everyone in the world to Netflix, and then having done so, radically jack up the price. That's the only way that I can see them surviving. Because it's not like, Amazon, we sell books. And then now we sell everything. And you can get everything from Amazon, and we are going to crush our competitors. Netflix is not in a position to crush Amazon Prime or Disney Plus or Peacock or any of the other streaming networks. And let's talk about Germany. This is actually, I've known of this story for several years, but people are talking about it again because of a lengthy article at the New Yorker. And it's about a man called Helmut Kentler, who was, I share a birthday with him, born July the 2nd, 1928 in Köln, and died July the 9th, 2008 in Hanover. Wikipedia describes him as a German psychologist, sexual scientist, and professor for social education at the University of Hanover. After his death, sexual political positions in his writings were seen and criticized as promotion and abetting of pedophilia. Oh, they were seen as that, were they? After graduating from high school, Helmut Kentler wanted to study theology to become a pastor. His father insisted he undertake technical vocational training. He completed an apprenticeship as a locksmith and subsequently studied electrical engineering in Aachen. After the death of his father, he withdrew from his studies. From 1953 to 54, he trained as an interpreter in English and French. Afterwards, he worked in Switzerland and Freiburg im Breisgau, psychology, medicine, education, and philosophy. During his studies, he participated in a field trial with young workers. I wonder how many of them he sexually molested because he was an adult. He was a how would you say, a prophet of pedophilia. According to Wiki, Kentler was one of the advocates of an emancipatory youth work and considered a representative of sexual education of the 1960s and 70s. In his work as a court expert and expert on child and adolescent sexuality, he received recognition in professional circles. From 1979 to 1982, he was president of the German Society for Social Scientific Sexual Research. Later, he was on the advisory board of the Humanitische Union. He was also a member of the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Sexualforschung. For Kentler, theory and practice were tightly knit throughout his life. His development of a theory of emancipatory youth work grew out of his work with adolescents and young adults during his studies in the 5 years he spent working in church educational institutions. He attempted in theory and practice group pedagogy and teamwork as a trusting and respectful cooperation of pedagogues with different professional competence, and attempted to gain insight into psychosocial connections for learning and emancipation processes for young people and adults. This was a new concept for church educational work in the 1960s. I'll say, during the student riots in Berlin, Kentler was temporarily active as a psychological consultant for police issues. The sexual liberation movement of Berlin students in communities and shared flats resulted in his advocacy of an emancipatory sexual education in the home, which was also scientifically reflected in his dissertation in 1975 and made him an expert in sexual education in the further course of his professional life. At the end of the 1960s, in a model experiment, he placed several neglected 13 to 15-year-old boys whom he considered secondary mental defectives with pedophiles he knew, claiming that this would reintegrate them into society under their care and to allow them to grow into mature adults. Due to the criminal offense associated with it, he made this public only after the statute of limitations had expired more than a decade later. Kentler hoped that the experiment would help the children to regain social stability through exposure to pedophiles. He was aware that the adults would most likely perform sexual acts on the minors. The scandal was publicly debated in 2015, and the Senate Youth Administration then commissioned the scientist Teresa Nentwig from the University of Göttingen to investigate the incident and forward her findings to the relevant authorities. At a factional hearing of the FDP in 1981, Kentler reported, "These people only endured these moronic boys because they were in love, infatuated with them." In an expert opinion for the Senate's Verwaltung for Family, Frauen und Jugend, he described the results of the 1988 trial as a complete success. At that time, he did not have to fear any criminal consequences because of the statute of limitations. Apparently, he wasn't worried about being torn limb from limb. He also maintained contacts with the former participants during his teaching activities in Hanover, and in an expert opinion for the Berlin Family Court in the early 1990s, recommended that one of the abused youths continue to stay with his pedophile foster father, who he described as a pedagogical natural talent. Kentler was single, homosexual, and had 3 adoptive sons and 1 foster son. So QAnon, it's all nonsense, right? There's no powerful pedophiles in politics. Well, I mean, you could look at the Jimmy Savile scandal in Britain, where he was given control over 2 hospitals, even though the police knew for decades that he was a serial molester of young, sometimes very young girls and boys. You could look at the scandal in Belgium, or essentially, what was his name? Marc Dutroux, something like that. Essentially, a pedophile cabal was running the country. You could look at, back to England, you look at the influence that pedophiles had in the Labour Party under the guise of civil rights. And I suppose you could look at Danny the Red, Daniel Cohn-Bendit, legendary 68er. I think it's Cohn-Bendit. Defense of pedophilia. Cohn-Bendit has been accused of defending pedophilia as he published a number of provocative statements regarding sex with children in the 1970s and 1980s. And this fellow he's very highly honored. He was a recipient of the European Parliament's European Initiative Prize in 2016. He may be a pedophile, but he's a globalist. So, it all balances out, right? Let's see. Let's go to this story at the New Yorker by Rachel Aviv. In 2017, a German man who goes by the name Marco came across an article in a Berlin newspaper with a photograph of a professor he recognized from childhood. The first thing he noticed was the man's lips. They were thin, almost non-existent, a trait that Marco had always found repellent. He was surprised to read that the professor, Helmut Kentler, had been one of the most influential sexologists in Germany. The article described a new research report that investigated what was called the Kentler experiment. Beginning in the late 60s, Kentler had placed neglected children in foster homes run by pedophiles. The experiment was authorized and financially supported by the Berlin Senate. In a report submitted to the Senate in 1988, Kentler had described it as a complete success. Marco had grown up in foster care, and his foster father had frequently taken him to Kentler's home. Now he was 34 with a 1-year-old daughter, and her meals and naps structured his days. After he read the article, he said, "I just pushed it aside. I didn't react emotionally. I did what I do every day. Nothing really. I just sat around in front of the computer." Marco looks like a movie star. He is tanned with a firm jaw, thick dark hair, and a long, symmetrical face. As an adult, he has cried only once. "If someone were to die in front of me, I would, of course, want to help them, but it wouldn't affect me emotionally," he told me. "I have a wall, and emotions just hit against it." He lived with his girlfriend, a hairdresser, but they never discussed his childhood. He was unemployed. Once he tried to work as a mailman, but after a few days he quit because whenever a stranger made an expression that reminded him of his foster father, an engineer named Fritz Henkel, he had the sensation that he was not actually alive, that his heart had stopped beating, and that the color had drained from the world. When he tried to speak, it felt as if his voice didn't belong to him. Several months after reading the article, Marco looked up the number for Teresa Nentweg, a young political scientist at the University of Göttingen Institute for Democracy Research, who had written the report on Kentler. He felt both curious and ashamed. When she answered the phone, he identified himself as an affected person. He told her that his foster father had spoken with Kentler on the phone every week in ways that Marco had never understood. Kentler, a psychologist and a professor of social education at the University of Hanover, had seemed deeply invested in his upbringing. Nentweg had assumed that Kentler's experiment ended in the 1970s, but Marco told her he lived in his foster home until 2003 when he was 21. I was totally shocked, she said. She remembers Marco saying several times, "You were the first person I've told. This is the first time I've told my story." As a child, he'd taken it for granted. That was the way he was treated. The way he was treated was normal. Such things happen, he told himself. The world is like this. It's eat and be eaten. But now, he said, I realized that the state had been watching. It is now my firm belief that sex education leads to pedophilia, that it leads to active pedophilia, the promotion of pedophilia, the normalization of pedophilia, and this should have been evident to everyone at the start. Why are you talking with children about sexual relations unless you are attempting to corrupt them? It remains a mystery to me how this managed to get into the schools. Why the parents didn't simply, show up at the principal's office and de-pants him or worse, but no. And now we have in the province of Ontario, students in grade 1, 6-year-olds are going to be taught about sexual trafficking. So let's terrorize every 6-year-old in the province of Ontario, because it's not allowed for children to have any sense of innocence anymore. Let's go to the chat. Okay. Accidentally melted a plastic container in my stove once. One of the worst experiences of my life, says Emma Nimpton. Didn't Kevin say hi to Bryden yesterday? Indeed, I did. Gulf Coast Prepper said would vote for KMG, but voting is fake, would still work for the campaign and stuff. Who's Bryden? He's the friend of someone who I first saw in the chat yesterday, I believe. Good excuse to get rid of that friggin' small grill. I hated it, says Chogokin 666. Yeah, well, grill while you can, because of course grilling is wicked, and apparently it's cultural appropriation from Black people, and eating meat is destructive of the planet. And if we're going to meet our carbon reduction targets, people are going to have to be forced to eat less meat. Also, apparently, according to this fellow Josh Barrow, who writes for Forbes or whatever, that grilling outside is disgusting. Yes, he is exactly that sort of person. Okay, let's see. Enron says Durbin doesn't get the Pelosi level of hate he deserves from people on our side. Chokin 666 says, I just broiled a steak and forgot I had a bunch of stored items in the oven. Oh dear. Yeah. I don't know. That's a problem I've kind of wrestled with as I grow older. This fear that, I'm going to turn the oven on and forget about it, and leave it on forever, I mean, I don't know. In the same way that, I sometimes think, I'm going to learn to forget how to walk, because apparently that happens to old people. It hasn't happened yet, so I'm going to keep walking. So, I don't lose the ability to do it. Okay, and we're getting near to the end. In related news, New Yorker story, and in more pedophilia promotion, this is from Post Millennial, from Jared Jager. University professor argues it's unjust for parents to have veto power over children's gender transition. A philosophy professor from Arizona State University recently had a paper published in an academic journal wherein she argued that parents should lose veto power over their children's gender transition. In the same way, apparently, they've lost veto power over the sexual education of their children and the promotion of homosexuality and transsexuality. The issue of medical ethics is as old as the practice of medicine itself, and for many, the big questions now revolve around agency. In the case of most medical procedures, adults are free to choose what they do and do not want done to their bodies, while children require the signing off of parent or guardian. When it comes to gender transition medical care, however, some are seeking to change these rules to give children more autonomy. Among them is Arizona State University philosophy professor Maura Priest. She recently published an academic paper making the case that parents should essentially take a back seat to their child's gender transition. In the paper, Priest first claims that puberty blocking treatment is the established standard of care for children with gender dysphoria. She then follows that line of reasoning, quote, "Given that we generally think that parental authority should not go so far as to, 1, severally and permanently harm a child, and 2, prevent a child from access to standard physical care, then it follows that parental authority should not encompass denying gender dysphoric children access to puberty blocking treatment." Okay, so let's look at this logic here. Apparently, cutting off the breasts, radical double mastectomy of healthy young women, minors, does not permanently harm a child. And apparently, radical double mastectomy of healthy breasts of young women, minors, is standard physical care now. As the Daily Wire's Chrissy Clark notes, Priest uses arguments made by other scholars in the field, such as Melbourne Law School researcher Lauren Notini, but takes them one step further, suggesting that the lived experience of alphabet people should trump professional medical opinion. If the medical community is to take alphabet people testimony seriously, as they should, Priest writes, then it is no longer the job of physicians to do their own weighing of the costs and benefits of transition-related care. Assuming the patient is informed and competent, then only the patient can make this assessment, because only the patient has access to the true weight of transition-related benefits. Okay, well, as you may know, I hope I'm not shocking anyone, there are people who believe in other kinds of mutilation. They believe that, they're not real until they have their fingers cut off, or an hand cut off, or an arm cut off, or whatever. So if we are to bow to the lived experiences of people who have had this grotesque mutilation done, then physicians presumably will be forced to perform these operations. And of course, parents won't be able to object to them. I suppose it's inevitability of public education that children no longer belong to their parents, let alone God, but they belong instead to the state, that the state now owns our children. Final thing I'm going to talk about today is how people dress. This is by Jeff Minnick in Chronicles. You can find it at chroniclesmagazine.org. Yesterday, I was tapping away on the laptop when through the window I saw a young man walking up the drive toward the house. He was shirtless, wearing jeans and brogans. Do they still call work boots by that name? And I correctly assumed he was one of the crew repaving the driveway of the house across the street. When I opened the door, he offered me a business card and began telling me the crew could repair my driveway as well. Shirtless, sweaty, and a bit pudgy, the young man thanked me for hearing him out, turned, and walked down the drive. It was then I saw that his jeans had slipped well down his rear end, exposing him in a highly embarrassing way. Another couple of inches, and he might as well have paraded through the neighborhood naked as the day he was born, at least on the backside. I wanted to call him back to the porch, offer him a drink, invite him to take a seat, and then convey a couple of simple facts. If you're going to roam the neighborhood, drumming up business, take 30 seconds to pull up your pants and put on an upper garment, preferably a short-sleeved shirt. I kept my mouth shut. Shame on me. I should have given him at least a gentle hint, for the way we dress often has repercussions for our behavior in society. Most of us would agree, I think, that American standards of dress have declined in the last 50 years. Here in Front Royal, for example, a trip to the grocery store or Walmart reveals many shoppers dressed in gym apparel. Others wear jeans, shorts, and t-shirts, often unattractive and ill-fitting because of the owner's weight. Few women wear dresses or skirts, and a man in a suit and tie is a rarity. Occasionally, there's a shopper wearing flannel pajama bottoms. Ordinarily, whenever I travel to town to write and read in the coffee shop, shop at the grocery store, visit the bank, or go to church, I wear khakis and a button-down shirt appropriate to the season. Nothing all that fancy, right? Yet in one of the first articles I wrote for Intellectual Takeout, How Did America Become a Nation of Slobs?, I noted how one of my granddaughters, while watching Casablanca with me, questioned why everyone was so dressed up. When I explained that everyone used to dress this way, but not anymore, she responded with, "You do." As I say in the article, that if I'm an example of haute couture, then ordinary fashion is as dead as Dickens' a doornail. Yes, I remember going to an Easter Mass in Victoria some years ago, and I was dressed in a sports jacket, in a button-down shirt, which was done up, and a tie, and a pair of slacks. This was Easter Mass, and I was the best-dressed person there. I may have been the only person there who was even wearing a sports jacket, let alone a suit. And I thought, do these people, do they think that this is appropriate attire? You know, with your body spilling out of your shorts and, your top pulled up to here. They really think this. I saw one of Joe Biden's granddaughters dressed this way. Could have been for her confirmation. Anyway, back to Chronicles. The neglect in our dress is not so much deliberate nowadays as it is simply a part of who we are. We seem unaware of the public image we create in our choice of clothing. With the exception of places like church and work, we either dress for comfort or we simply don't care about the way we look. But I wonder, does this tendency towards sloppiness have ramifications beyond individual appearance? In his recent Intellectual Takeout post, The Forgotten Conservatism of No Country for Old Men, Alexander Riley includes a passage from Cormac McCarthy's novel, later made into a movie, where Sheriff Ed Tom Bell reflects on the ways American culture has gone off the rails. Quote, "It starts when you begin to overlook bad manners. Anytime you quit hearing sir and ma'am, the end is pretty much in sight. The old people I talked to, if you could have told them that there would be people on the streets of our Texas towns with green hair and bones in their noses, speaking a language they couldn't even understand, well, they just flat out wouldn't have believed you. But if you told them it was their own grandchildren," I still see people in my town practicing politeness, holding the door open at the public library for that mom with 3 little ones who is carrying a bag filled with books, saying thank you and treating others with respect. On the other hand, I also hear some young people using the F-bomb without regard for those around them, and I see men sitting in church seemingly oblivious to the pregnant woman standing by the wall behind them, looking in vain for an open seat. Time has changed our dress and our manners, bringing a certain crudity to our culture. Many of us hope for a way out of the decadence into which we have fallen, wanting music, movies, and literature that brighten rather than darken our lives, particularly for our children's sake. But if one cause of this decline has to do with our dress and manners? What if we dressed as if we respected ourselves and showed respect for others through practicing basic etiquette? Could those small changes lead us to a better place? Yeah, I wonder. I suppose that's the Jordan Peterson argument. You know, Peterson telling people to clean up their room without, I mean, this squalor is a symptom of a deeper malaise. You know, and I would have thought that addressing the deeper malaise would be more important. But I walk out on the street, and regardless of where I am, what part of Victoria I'm in, almost all of the people look like the shattered remnants of a defeated army. And it's distressing. It also makes life more dangerous, because typically in the past, if you had gone on the street and seen a man and he was dressed like this, you could assume with a, 99.999% certainty that he would not represent a physical threat to you, because people who dress like this typically do not assault strangers on the street. And I was thinking, what would pass for that now? Hard shoes. No one under 40 wears hard shoes anymore, maybe under 50. But if you see someone, in public wearing hard shoes, this is not, it's not likely that this person, again, is going to assault strangers. I suppose maybe sandals as well, because people who tend to wear sandals tend to have hippie-ish ideals, and they're not the sort of people likely to assault people on the street. Glib Medley says, I remember when Kevin started co-hosting with Luke, he would wear a hoodie with the hood up. He started wearing the jacket and tie a couple weeks in. Yes, Emma Nimpton says, this whole sloppy dressing thing has been going on for a long time now. Thank you for your praise, Dan Allison. I appreciate it. Hamilton, do you own any Pilot Flieger watches with Type B dials? I'm going to save up for one by Laco or Laco. That chain, Jack in the Box, the American fast food chain, they don't have it in Canada. But they have Jack, right? Who has the, the white head, like a golf ball or ping pong ball, more like, right? And a conical hat. A lot of the commercials have been very funny. In one of them a few years ago, he hires some branding experts who's this aggressive millennial woman with problem glasses and speaking in buzzwords. And at one point, they're walking down the hall, and she points at his arm, and she says, "What's that wrist bracelet you're wearing?" And he says, "Do you mean my watch?" Because, of course, since everyone's got smartphones or even cell phones, people don't really, young people don't wear watches anymore. Glib Medley, are you sure on the hoodie? I recall a baseball cap, but not a hoodie. I can't, that's Ann Run. I can't remember myself. I find it unlikely that I would have worn a hoodie. I do have one. It's part of a quilted jacket. I have a quilted jacket that has a hood. Let's put it that way. But I don't remember. And having done so many of these, they all begin to bleed together, So that's it for today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow is a Theater Thursday, and I will be discussing Max Ophül's classic from 1950, La Ronde, based on the scandalous Schnitzler novel. And on Music Monday, I'm going to be discussing, what am I going to be discussing? Oh, Richard Strauss. And on, the book club this week, as previously mentioned, Tom Bauer's exceedingly entertaining biography of Boris Johnson. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, which would be very much appreciated and, well, actually needed at this particular time of my life, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.